Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
You may recall a rather crazy story in the news a while back where someone stole Lady Gaga's dogs. And it was all over the news. And I'm not a big Lady Gaga fan. I know who she is. I'm familiar with some of her music. It's not for me. That's okay. I know there's music out there that doesn't appeal to me. It appeals to other people. That's fine. And she, of course, is a master of getting attention. So that's something good. In many respects, she was the next generation Madonna. Because Madonna, for a few years, could just turn around and be on the front page of various magazines and newspapers. So here's the story. Lady Gaga will not have to pay the $500,000 reward to the woman involved in dognapping her dogs. And that's according to the judge who's reviewed this now. So from USA Today, and Mary Walrath Holdridge wrote it, and a whole bunch of people sent it to me. Lady Gaga does not have to pay out a promised $500,000 reward for the return of her French bulldogs that were kidnapped back in 2021. Los Angeles County judge ruled on Monday that Lady Gaga had no obligation to pay the woman, who's 53 years old, for the return of her dogs, as the woman had unclean hands in relation to the original dognapping. And unclean hands is in quotes here because that is a term of art. I've talked before about equity. Equity is the concept that sometimes courts do things or tell people to do things or tell people to refrain from doing things. So if a court orders you to pay money, that's called money damages. And if a court orders you to do something, that is equity, okay? And there's a couple other aspects to it. But when a court is being equitable and looking at how the equities line up, somebody who comes into court and says, Your Honor, I want you to order someone to do something on my behalf because equity dictates it. If you've got unclean hands in that same transaction, the court can say, no, that's a defense to what you're asking for. And so obviously, if you kidnap a dog and a person offers a reward for the return of their dog and you return the dog you kidnapped, it's pretty clear that you're not the one who's entitled to that reward, because that would obviously be, among other things, contrary to public policy. So the woman filed a lawsuit against Lady Gaga earlier this year after the singer failed to pay her after she was charged for her involvement in the original incident, which happened in 2021. In the multi-million-dollar lawsuit, she accuses Gaga of breach of contract, fraud by false promise, and fraud by misrepresentation when she failed to pay a no questions asked reward upon the dog's safe return. She sued not only for the $500,000, but for an additional $1.5 million in further damages. The judge says she's not entitled to see any of it. News of the dognapping first hit headlines in February of 21 when Gaga's dog walker was brutally attacked while out and about with Gaga's 3 dogs. During the walk, 2 men jumped out of a car and attempted to snatch the pets, resulting in a struggle. The fight escalated until one of the men pulled out a weapon and shot the dog walker in the chest, which caused life-threatening injuries that put him in the hospital and also caused the partial removal of a lung. Very, very serious stuff here. 2 of the dogs were stolen while a 3rd dog was left behind. Gaga was in Europe at the time on tour and took to Instagram to ask the public for help and to offer a reward for the return of her beloved pets. She said $500,000, no questions asked. The dogs were recovered just 2 days later when a woman who police originally believed to be uninvolved and unassociated returned them to LAPD's police station in the Olympic community. It was later discovered that this woman was in a relationship with the father of one of the suspects in the attack, both of whom were charged as accessories to attempted murder alongside 2 other men. And so I'm a little unclear here on how many people were involved, because it's at 2 or 3, 1, 2, 3, at least 3 people, but more possibly, were charged with all kinds of crimes, including robbery and so on. So one of them was sentenced to 21 years for pulling the trigger, while another one received 4 and one received 6. So there are at least 3 people in legal difficulty. So the woman was charged with 1 count of accessory and receiving stolen property, but the accessory charge was dropped as part of a plea deal. So apparently she pled to something. She pled guilty to receiving stolen property worth more than $950 and was ordered to serve 2 years of felony probation. But of course, she never got the reward she was looking for, which she believed she's entitled to despite her involvement in the crime. She alleged in a complaint that the singer defrauded her into surrendering the pets with a promise of a no questions asked reward. But of course, they weren't hers. She had no right to keep them. So Court documents obtained by USA Today at the time showed that her allegations against the pop star were all these common law things like contract breach, fraud by false promise, etc. And in addition to the $500,000, she was seeking damages for pain and suffering, mental anguish, and loss of enjoyment of life. And so, yes, the woman who brought the stolen dogs in after the dog walker was shot and put in the hospital claimed that she was suffering pain and damages and anguish. In the suit, she went on to argue that she had fully performed her obligation under the unilateral contract and accused Gaga of advertising a reward with the intent to defraud and induce members of the public to rely upon it and to act upon said promise. Well, she did it with the intent that people would act upon it. But with intent to defraud, that is something that's very, very difficult to prove. And the fact that she didn't pay you doesn't mean she wasn't planning on paying anybody. The court originally dismissed the complaint in July, but allowed her to return after she amended the complaint. That's fairly common. This time, the judge not only ruled in Gaga's favor, but determined that she cannot even reattempt to file the suit. In other words, it cannot be fixed in any way that would solve these problems. The judge stated earlier that the woman was attempting to benefit from her admitted wrongdoing. In this decision, she ruled that Gaga had no obligation to abide by that promise, saying a party to a contract who acts wrongfully in entering or performing the contract is not entitled to thereafter benefit from their wrongdoing by seeking to enforce that contract. So it goes to concepts of equity. Well, the woman argued that she was not involved in the theft, and she says she had no knowledge of its planning. The judge pointed out in her final decision that, notably, she never says she was unaware that the dogs were stolen, after they were stolen, or at the time that she received them. So if she had said, I just somehow came upon these dogs, and if that was true, she'd have a better case. But because she was involved, she loses out. And because I know I always have some naysayers in the audience, I'm going to have at least one or two people go, but Steve, it says no questions asked. It says no questions asked. It doesn't say no prosecutions. So in other words, someone walks up to you and goes, here's your thing back. You say, oh, thank you. And you give them a reward and they leave. That's no questions asked, okay? And so obviously people were prosecuted for this, and it makes sense that they were. And you could not expect that, oh, by the way, this reward is actually out there, not only for somebody who just comes upon these dogs, but for whoever stole them. I'm going to pay them $500,000 because that'd be the equivalent of a ransom. That would. And so I mentioned earlier something being contrary to public policy. Courts do sometimes consider, how will this look if we grant this? And what will it encourage or discourage in society? So we often do throw the book at a defendant in a criminal case to deter other people from doing that. We want to make an example of somebody, right? Well, likewise, you don't want to make an example of these people by giving them $500,000 and saying, hey, look at you. Congratulations. You kidnapped a famous person's dogs. We'll give you $500,000. And so the very notion that a bunch of people pled guilty to this and involvement on some level, and one of them comes back into court and goes, yeah, but now I want my reward. So that's silly. And I know someone's going to go, but Steve, I still don't buy it. She said no questions asked. Well, do you know what she could have done? You know what Lady Gaga could have done if she wanted to? She could have handed that woman a check for $500,000 and then sued her and the other defendants who did the dognapping. She could sue all of them. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is a good cause of action in California, and all kinds of other things. Theft, robbery, those are things you can sue people for. And so she could have sued all of them. And now it's true that the woman who simply possessed the dogs at the end it appears that she was sentenced the least of all of them. So it may be that her involvement was less, but she was still involved. And as you might guess, and as you may know, the people who are participating in a criminal enterprise or a conspiracy often all bear the liability for it. So she could have, if she wanted to, cut her a check for $500,000 or put the money into escrow and say, hey, look, I'm going to put this money into escrow. I'm going to leave it there till this court case is done. You turn it over to the court. Just go here. I want the court to hang on to this because I'm now going to sue her for a couple $1 million and him and him and him for a couple $1 million. And I'll settle for that $500,000 right there. And guess what? So I'm amazed that the lawsuit got filed. I'm amazed that it got amended. I do not know if she had an attorney or not drafting or filing this, but then again, there's a lot of attorneys out there who are looking for work. I apologize for that. I'm not one of them, but I am an attorney. So there you go. So Mary Walrath Holdridge wrote this for USA Today. Lady Gaga will not pay the $500,000 reward to the woman who was found to be involved in the dog napping, according to the judge. Lawsuit thrown out for good. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Real freedom lies in wilderness, not in civilization.